Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network. Well, welcome back, everybody. This is the Hall of Fame portion of our program, and we reserve that title for individuals that we call upon. That I call them a sage. Those that have knowledge, that have worked in a certain field for many years, and can provide insight that maybe others can't because they haven't been around the block, so to speak. We've got a gentleman now who has been an urban and regional planner for many years, including teaching at the University of Pittsburgh. And he's given us so much insight, and not just in terms of urban planning, but also the career field, which we have some emails from students about what he does. But we're going to re-engage with him. Member of our Hall of Fame, Richard Golden Bickel Jr. is back with us. How are you doing today, sir?
Very good, Steve.
It's great to have you back. It's been a little while, and we've talked about a lot of different things in terms of how communities are developed, how cities build an infrastructure. We have a new administration, and some things are changing, and I just saw this literally today. This is out today, that the new transportation secretary has instructed his agency to focus their work and programming on communities with higher birth and marriage rates. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that. In layman's terms, in my eyes, it kind of makes sense that if that's where the populations are growing, that's where we need to focus our attention. But I really don't know if that's the answer. What are your initial thoughts on that?
Well, there's two types of communities. There's communities that have plenty of investment because they're viewed as growth areas. And then there's communities that are disinvested, which means they have problems and they need incentives to get investment. And so one view of that is if communities are growing rapidly and have high birth rates, that means their population is going to grow. The other way to look at it is sometimes poverty areas have higher birth rates than what's going on in the development side. And so it's kind of a mixed message, I think.
And to your point, in the story that came out today, there are state and federal lawmakers that are already expressed concern about this new policy. One of them is and I'm not even looking at the political side of this, I'm just looking at what they do. This is the governor of Massachusetts says, quote, "I got to be honest, I've really tried here, but I do not see a connection. We're a state that's very serious about ensuring that our residents and our businesses have access to the highest quality public transit in the entire country." So it seems what she's saying is, all right, you're going to focus on with the higher marriage and birth rates. What about the rest of us?
Right. I think that's a very good statement, and you can read that policy prescription by the spokesman any way you want to, because it's such a broad topic. But if the focus is on public transit, then you've got to focus on how to get transit located in places that are growing. At the same time, transit can be a stimulus to make disinvestment areas start growing.
From an infrastructure view and the investments that are made, and there's only so much money to go around, wouldn't it make more sense to do a traffic analysis to see where the backups are and then cross-reference that to city planners and I'm sure that there is a projected growth analysis based on the economy and things like that, and not just looking at where the population growth is?
Well, yes. Demographics, meaning population and employment statistics, and increases in jobs or declines are fundamental ingredients to developing a long-range plan, which is usually required by the federal government, state governments, and even local governments with a 20-year horizon. And there's plenty of things that can go on in that 20 years, But the plans usually have goals of where they would like to see growth occur within the boundaries of that community and how they would interact with their neighbors, because transportation lines don't respect municipal boundaries in most cases. They cross them, and the climate right now is uncertain because the new administration keeps changing their policies or trying to change the Biden administration policies, and at the same time, there other policies are still in place, usually with the Federal Highway Administration or the Federal Transit Administration, and those are the guidelines for metropolitan planning organizations, which are the local region planning organizations that look at balancing the available funds with the demand for new projects. And that's where the Metropolitan Planning Organization Board meets to make a decision on which projects make what's called the TIP, the Transportation Improvement Program. And those projects that make the TIP means they have a higher chance of getting federal funding and state matching funds than if they're not in the TIP.
I appreciate that insight. And all of this, it's funny when you hear this projection. And again, I'm not talking about politics. I'm not even going there. I'm just talking about an idea. The idea could have came from, a purple monkey in space. Doesn't matter. Here's an idea. It sounds reasonable. Well, if the population is growing, put all the focus there. But what about if it's a tiny town that has a population growth of like 4%? But, let's say the data shows that the U.S. population growth rate is really only 0.5%. Does that mean that tiny town is now going to get all these new roads and a railroad system rolling through there because their population growth spiked up? It just almost now doesn't make sense.
Yeah, the local politics may be fiercer than the national politics because that's where people show up at a public meeting and start complaining. And also because of the not in my backyard syndrome, where they see a new project of a larger scale than they're used to, and they get very uptight, and they go to the local meeting and say, we don't want it, and no matter how good it is from a policy perspective. But that's the balance between a long-range plan setting some long-range policy guidelines and the reality of local officials and local political reaction from residents of the community.
Again, I have to preface it by saying I'm not talking politics. I'm not looking at either side. That statement that the transportation secretary made, it almost sounds like one of those, let's throw that out there because it sounds good. And it's easy to understand. Oh, yeah, that makes sense. All right. You got more people on their way, ready to be born. And they need more. But it doesn't really make a lot of sense when you boil it down. I have an email I want to share with you, Richard, from Justin. He's in Detroit. He says, I was looking at a career as a civil engineer, but am now interested in being a city planner. Can you give me some insight on both of those positions?
Well, the civil engineer would usually be in a municipal office that is involved in capital projects or perhaps transportation. The planner would be in a different office in many cases who would get involved in the decision making or the plans for the capital projects and other activities in the community. And I think the career orientation would be, if you already have an engineering degree and you're switching into planning, you've got a good background, and the planning will support that. If you don't have an engineering background, you can still evaluate the planning career from a fresh perspective.
Did you ever consider civil engineer at all in your career path?
No, because I I wasn't great in math, but I did want to be a doctor, and I found out I wasn't really good in chemistry either. But that's where I made a career change from being a doctor to taking an urban geography course at Pitt and being turned on by the concept of planning. And the course was taught by a professor in the planning school, and ended up staying at Pitt for my graduate degree, and it helped quite a bit to have that continuity.
If you could do it again, what might you have done, if anything, a little bit differently along the way?
Well, definitely I would have taken at least one basic economics course, because I got to planning school with not much grounding in economics, and it was even starting my first job at Montgomery County Planning Commission in Pennsylvania, I had not had a real economics background, and that's very important for planners to understand those concepts, especially when you're dealing with development projects. And the issue for me was I wanted it so bad, I went out and bought a book by Professor Samuelson called Economics, and I sort of read the book and taught myself some of the basic concepts. So I would say don't escape undergraduate school without a basic course in economics.
Wow. Interesting, because it's all tied in there, but a lot of times we have our attention focused on the prize, be it, the job we want, but maybe that's not the right direction to go. Is there something that you would suggest, maybe if somebody wants to work in urban planning, your top 3 things that somebody should do, be it courses, direction, internships, anything stand out there for you?
Well, I already mentioned one of them, something on economics. The other would be something on geography, to learn about places. Planning deals with places, and they can be local governments, they can be county governments, can be the state or the feds. And you need a grounding to understand what it means to be in a place and how plans affect those places, both within the community you're doing the planning for, but for the adjacent communities where they are impacted by what you do in your community, and vice versa. And so I would say if there is a course called Urban Geography, I would consider that also. And last would be a focus on dealing with people. Sociology course could be helpful, basic course on demographics, because you're going to be dealing with people, and people will tell you, I don't care what your policy is, I don't want it in my backyard, or tell me what the benefits are of this project. And so you've got to use what I would call friendly persuasion and not the hammer to convince people that your ideas are good.
Interesting. Do you feel that a lot of people in these positions are more introverted and don't realize that they really need to connect with the public from time to time?
Well, planners are, especially today, are taught to interact with people and to be sensitive to their needs. I've never been an engineer. They have a reputation of being kind of closed-minded, but I don't think that the modern engineer is the way they were 20 or 30 years ago. I think people are much more oriented to community needs, and that means all the people who live there and the different types, and not to feel like you're in an ivory tower and everybody else is assailing you.
I'm curious your thoughts, if there are any, with aviation, with some of the challenges, accidents that we've had in the past couple of weeks. Any thoughts there in terms of airports, air travel? It's part of the urban situation. Anything initially come to mind?
Well, the location of airports, if you had a clean slate, you would not put it in the middle of a large city and have a military base and local airport activities going on in close proximity. But we don't have that luxury if you're dealing with an urban setting.
Sure.
Dulles Airport is an example of building something new far away from the downtown, and the conflicts are much different, and there are fewer. But Washington National is a very tight airport. I didn't realize it was considered one of the highest runway usage in the country.
Wow.
Because it is where they said the runway where the accident occurred, or right near it, was one of the highest usage in the country. I was kind of astounded.
I had no idea.
Yeah, and I think it's because you've got the national capital there, you've got military activities, and you've got civil aviation, and all those things are happening at the same time. And just like the fires in Los Angeles, there are multiple jurisdictions that have to be coordinated with, and it's a real issue. And Washington has always done it pretty well. And the lesson is you've got to maintain good lines of communication with these different agencies. They all need a seat at the table if something happens, and you can learn what it's like to be in their shoes, not just your own.
You mentioned the wildfires in California, and that was on my list of things to talk about, if we may. Initial thoughts on that. Could there be better planning regarding that? You know, you mentioned different jurisdictions and maybe some challenges within there. Any overall thoughts there?
Well, from watching the media coverage, I would say the Los Angeles area has done a pretty good job of coordinating the multiple jurisdictions that are there. When they read off the people getting credit, etc., it's amazing that they can even talk to each other, because there's usually a lot of turf protection when you're dealing with different agencies. And this sounded like they really pulled it together and had open lines of communication and were able to coordinate their response to a horrendous situation with those fires and the winds that they were getting.
There was a lot of talk when it was in the throe of the fires that equipment wasn't available. There wasn't enough staff. People were let go. There were tons of firefighting apparatus sitting in a field or a huge parking lot that was never accessed. Thoughts on that, or if there's just nothing around that, if the budgeting isn't available?
Well, I think the decision to make some cuts was made before there was any thought of a massive wildfire breakout, and which made it sound bad now, but it was probably a decision that had to be made given scarce resources. That's why transportation projects are really dependent on flow of federal dollars and state dollars and even local funding to get them advanced. And if the money's not there, or if the public transit agency is having a periodic funding crisis, projects don't occur, and people suffer because they can't commute the way they were used to. And that is a common theme with public transit, because it doesn't have the resources that the highway projects have.
I want to go back to one of the first things I discussed with you in the very beginning when we started doing these segments, and see if anything has changed. What do you think now, based on maybe new administration or new priorities? It's an ever-changing world. What do you think in terms of urban planning should be a focus now?
Well, there's no doubt that we have with the new administration in Washington, we're having fundamental changes to priorities and that applies to transit and highway projects as well. The emphasis should be on doing good plans that look at each community or each county, mm-hmm. and then the region. What are the main needs and what can be done to accomplish those needs? And most regions have a combination of rapidly growing areas and what I call disinvestment areas that need incentives to grow. And that balance in their transportation plan and their capital program, et cetera, is how the decision makers decide where the money's going to go and what gets funded and what doesn't. You can have a really good project, but if it has low ridership potential, it's not going to make the cut, and it's going to get no support for federal funding. We had an example of a project in the King of Prussia area near Philadelphia, which looked like a real winner, and the feds said, nope, doesn't meet our criteria, and therefore it's not going to advance. And that's what happens.
We talked about California. I want to pivot over to New York for a sec. Biggest city in the world. In terms of urban planning, is there something that you could share about New York City that the rest of us probably didn't know? What was done to make life easier, better in terms of transportation, people movement, all of that? Is there any little things that most of us don't know?
Well, the premier planner, he's called a planner, but I would call him an engineer with the power to do planning. He was Robert Moses, and he developed expressways like the ones that are out into the suburbs from Philadelphia, the different parkways. He also had plans to put expressways through Greenwich Village in the southern part of Manhattan, and he did a lot of good things, but at the same time, he was no friend of public transit. He was a highway guy, and fortunately, some of his proposals were not supported. And you've got to have good people working in the offices, and you've got to have elected officials who are willing to weigh the options and the pluses and minuses of proposals. And if they propose a certain project and then it goes to the federal funding agency and they say, well, we like your project, but it doesn't have enough ridership, or it doesn't seem to solve the traffic problems, then it's not going to get supported.
Wow. Love the insight, things that we don't realize. We take it for granted. You just get in your car and you drive, or you hop on a plane or a train. All of this, the way the flow of traffic, people, buildings, sanitation.
New York is suffering. Some people are suffering. Some people are very happy with this new congestion pricing initiative. And it's been kicked around for a couple of years. And finally, they decided to go ahead with a $15 charge below 60th Street if you entered that area, which is where Central Park starts.
Yep. And
it was pulled back by the governor because of political considerations.
Yeah, it's called election time.
And now it's alive again. It's actually being implemented.
Yeah. And
they lowered the fee from $15 to $9. But people are still very upset. And if you're reliant on driving to get to that area from nearby suburbs, you're opposed to the project or the concept. If you're already in the area, it doesn't affect you very much, but it's really an experiment, because some European cities have looked at this, and it seems to work. But in New York, it's off to a shaky start, and hopefully the president's not going to try to kill it, because he's probably getting a lot of pressure too from some of the people who are opposed to it in the New York area. And he's made one of his statements saying, "I'm going to kill it as soon as I get into office." Well, that hasn't happened quite yet, but there's still a chance.
Yeah. And I know people that work in the city, and they've said that, yeah, it seems like less traffic, but they also say people are just taking a different route. Richard, always great having you on. Love the insight. This is what's going on in our world. This is so important when it comes to our lives, urban planning. And you've got so many years of experience and such insight for those looking to get into the field. And that's also why we make you our Hall of Fame. Thank you so much for being here again today.
All right. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Hey, what's up, everybody? I'm Jason Derulo. I love that music connects to people all over the country. But unfortunately, so does something else. Childhood hunger. 15 million kids struggle with hunger right here in America. And yet, every year, billions of pounds of surplus food in the U.S. go to waste instead of going to the children in need. Feeding America is working to change this. The Feeding America nationwide network of food banks rescues this surplus of food to help provide meals to families in virtually every community in the United States, including yours. But they just can't do this alone. Join me in the fight against hunger in America. For more information on what you can do to get involved, visit feedingamerica.org. That's feedingamerica.org. Together we can solve hunger. Together, we're Feeding America. A message from Feeding America and the Ad Council.